Hi,
Great.
Brian. Was anyone
Great.
able to hear what I said?
We could hear you just fine. It was perfect. It was
Perfect. Thank
perfect.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, this is just a little chat between the two of us for everybody's benefit. And, you know, one of the first things that I would note is, you've taken investments from somebody I like a lot, S2G, I believe.
That's correct.
Um, a lot of people on this webinar, we're all asking ourselves, how do we get more money into this ecosystem? Our Freshwater Innovation Fund, we received 600K from the Department of Commerce just to help educate the investor class on water investing, water very broad, but maybe take me just a bit through that journey as it relates to maybe helping some of the, I've seen, the attendee list here today, and there's some companies we're working with, and it's a struggle. So
Yeah,
I just love your thoughts.
sure. So we were lucky. I mean, I think many entrepreneurs don't actually acknowledge the role of luck, or
No, it's all brilliance. Come
yeah,
on.
it's absolute brilliance. Yes, it's what I tell myself when I wake up every day. Um, no, I think we were lucky. The early discussions with Mark Abbott and myself at Woods Hole, we just had a whiteboard and we sketched out uh, how can we get to 10x lower cost or 100x lower cost, and it became increasingly clear that bespoke, expensive systems that go down to the
Yeah.
bottom of the ocean are just not going to cut it. There's no
Yeah.
way to lower the cost of something that costs $2 million to be $2,000, right? There's that path doesn't exist. So then the questions we started asking were, what's the best possible approximation for a useful data set? And this is, I'm hoping Joanna will deal with some of these questions later. But one of the things is, do we need full ocean depth? Do we need 2,000 meters? If we do 400 meters, then we have a lot of choice in reducing the cost of the device itself. It doesn't have to withstand those kinds of
Yeah.
pressures. So the crucial thing that Mark and I spent time on is the trade-offs. And when we arrived at a trade-off where, from my experience, I knew that if we made everything with custom off-the-shelf parts and then figured out if we made 10,000 of these, then we can get to a lower cost, right? But Mark was instrumental in then taking some of these ideas and then persuading the investors, given his 40-year background in in uh,
Yeah.
in the ocean world, and that's how we ended up getting connected with S2G. It helps to have an expert on your team who understands the impact of what you're going to do. And
Yeah.
obviously, you need long-term investors. And Lucas and S2G, Sanjeev and S2G were amazing in understanding. This is not a flip the business in 3 years kind of thing. It's going to take time. It's going to be a grind, but
Yeah.
if you can establish a credible path, you can persuade investors to back you.
Yeah. No, great points. So, in the Great Lakes, we've got our own set of challenges, but there's a lot of similarities to what I'm hearing on today's conversations, which I love, because I've always thought, and we always do, borrow from each other. And when I first started looking at USGS water level sensors
Yeah,
being $10,000 a pop, I'm like,
yeah,
something's wrong here.
right.
And thanks to some really forward thinking folks with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, we said, like, okay, let's buy a $50 water level sensor, let's buy a $150, let's buy a 500, and then let's benchmark them against that big USGS. And it turned
Right.
out 96% accuracy was enough, given that we could afford to put tens and dozens of these out there, and it creates a. But here's my question for you, and
Actually,
this
if you
all
don't
comes.
mind, can I
Yeah.
just say one quick thing related to that? I think ultimately we will be limited by the cost of sensors
Mm.
in scaling ocean or freshwater observation in general. And uh, part of that is sort of the science background of ocean observing.
Yeah.
The millidegree precision, the milli
Yeah.
PSU precision, and things like that. when you talk to, DoD customers, they don't really want that. They want, a hundredth of a degree is sufficient. They'll even take
Yes.
a tenth as long as they can get the scale, the spatial scale. So I think not all ocean observations are created equal. And part of what we need
Yeah.
to think about is how can the science community help us decide in what applications you can use lower resolution sensors, because we think there's a path to get to many more observations spatially at a lower resolution. And that's a trade-off that uh, I don't know how to solve because I don't know all the math, but there's probably a there, which would be a fantastic collaboration between the science ocean observing community and those of us who are trying to make businesses out of this. But go back to
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, no, this is great. I would encourage you to think through what we've built in Lake Erie, which is a
yeah,
test bed.
yeah,
We've got 17,000 square kilometers with telemetry coverage,
yeah.
so we can trial these sort of questions and
That's
get real world, answers. So how do we test bed? But here was my question was going to be ultimately who pays? With us, if we as we've rolled out a data as a service for the Smart Lake Erie watershed, we've been really, really lucky in that we've had some forward thinking utilities. And
that's
people
right.
don't realize, like, even though we have shipping lines between, here in Cleveland and Northern Europe, we have container shipping. We are very much attached to the ocean, but we also provide drinking water to tens of millions of people. And that brought the utilities into the focus. When, again, getting back to your point, we did a 3-year pilot with one large utility. And after 3 years, they're like, this is incredible. We're going to tell on the shout list from the world. It saves us money, it saves us operational expenses, and it paid for itself in 6 weeks. And so
Right.
now we're pushing that out. We can start to see a potential revenue model for all 5 Great Lakes. But where's your head when it comes to your revenue model?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that weather forecasting is one of the places where at least subsurface ocean data is just there's just not enough of it, and there are private weather forecasting outfits, but and NOAA, but the DoD also does a lot of, I mean, a lot of weather forecasting, not necessarily on the continental U.S., but where they need to be. And so uh, the DoD is going to be a big customer for our data. We're already talking to people. One of the advantages of what we've done is our underwater vehicles can be launched from exactly the same systems that they launch sonobuoys today. So the challenge of getting the sensor to where it needs to be has kind of been solved, right? So I view the DoD as an accelerant
Mm,
to revenue, and there is a lot of money available in the DoD community to prove to them. Your customers pay you to prove that your solution works, but you got to again have this sort of scientific credibility. So what I have to balance as a founder and CEO is be able to show that our data is valid before we run out of money.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
that's the
Well,
sprint. That's the
one
sprint.
of the one of the things I would push back a little bit on is just to your point, are you thinking at longer term sustainability? It's one thing to have one set of government contracts, but people like you and I have to figure out what's the next five.
That's right.
And for us, we make more money off of just simply charter boat captains who are willing to pay for our data, who are an
Absolutely.
afterthought when we built our
Right.
data as a service.
Right. And I think the one of the other things that's missing, and we're also fumbling our way through this, is there's a lot of input on what the requirements for ocean observing systems are, through the Oscar uh, uh, the website and things like that, really detailed, scientifically backed requirements for different kinds of applications. But the next step of if you had data at those, and this came up in one of the previous panels, if you had data at those resolutions, then what would the impact on a given business sector be? And there's just this missing gap, and 80% of the time I find myself, trying to justify to investors, this is the impact of, this is the specific
Yeah.
impact of this data on this business, and this is how we're going to go make money, right? And so in the DoD, it's very clear. They speak with their SBIRs and they speak with
Yeah.
their grants. But in the commercial sector, we have to persuade our investors that there's a there there. And ultimately, I know the gentleman from CA had said, we don't want to take a leap of faith, but I think there is a little bit of leap of faith, that, if you back a credible team with a credible path, then they'll eventually find the way.
So, we're coming up on time, but something I haven't heard really discussed today, and I'm curious on your thoughts as you grow this out, and that is workforce. Kind of where is your head as far as getting the talent or the training of the talent? And we refer to our bench as being from a research development standpoint and the workforce development. It's a small bench right now. We've got to build it up. And I literally just landed night before last from Amsterdam, where I attended Aquatech, and you know met all sorts of wonderful people, people we know, people we work with, new people. But also, we're exploring this new partnership with Finland, and with 3 universities there. And they were just telling me, little Finland has a brand new program where they've got 50 plus, postdocs, early stage, thinking about their PhD and on track, that they've invested in. Are we seeing that here? Would that be helpful to you if we had a collective conversation about what does the workforce look like? What universities do we work with to scale this up?
Yeah, absolutely. We are fortunate to be based in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area, where there's a lot of talent, especially in the ocean world. We've had people from the University of Rhode Island, and we have an endless supply of co-ops from Northeastern University. So people make the business. There's just no way around that. And having a trained workforce, people who can come in and hit the ground running, is absolutely crucial. So that conversation must be continuously had, because I think we forget over time, and then it needs to be renewed. But we are fortunate because we just live in this in Cambridge, or our company lives in Cambridge, and it's a phenomenal source of talent, both both on the technology side and on the business side. You know,
Yeah.
there's just a tremendous amount of analytical work that needs to be done to persuade investors and customers, business analytics that needs to be done, that is simply that requires talent, and we can't hire full-time people to make all this work, but having a source of student, really talented students, who get something out of this experience as well, is really important.
Yeah, well, I'll leave it on this point because I know we're out of time. But as we look at pressure costs and lowering costs, it's the same thing for even the O&M of our buoy system, as an example for the Great Lakes. For me to get a boat out to recalibrate a YSI sonde can be, 250, $300 an hour.
Yeah.
And that's because I have to send an engineer out, and having that sort of workforce that can be trained. And we've developed a program, we're starting to, where we can send out people even in high school and train them, and then that's their career path is servicing a lot of this water tech. So with that, I want to be mindful of time. Any last comments, Ravi?
No, there's a comment about Argo, from Cooper, whose work I really respect. I was using the Argo network as an example to show how underinvested it is, not saying it's not doing a good job. So I'm happy to discuss it with him offline. But yeah, I think if it were perfectly invested, then our jobs would all be much easier.
Yeah, and I noticed a comment from Jen that was fascinating too. How can we ensure that lowering the cost of ocean data doesn't compromise with quality and security? And Jen, I'll just mention for us, we've got tiers of data. What our utilities purchase from us is behind a paywall, to be blunt, and that's really higher quality data. What we make available to the public, is maybe has less, kind of scraping, of data to a degree. So you've got different customers with different needs.